Good morning, New Zealand.
Great.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm quite happy to hear that. All right, it is here approaching 1 a.m. local time, so please bear with me if I'm a bit tired, but I'll try my best to deliver a good speech. Well, it is in particular, I like to give talks to you. So yesterday I talked a bit about colors, but one thing I really love is my personal pet, the small hive beetle. And I want to start here right now with a bit of a party spoiler, because small hive beetle is not yet in your country, it's not yet in New Zealand. And please do not panic. When small hive beetle will come to your country, it will not be the end of beekeeping. It is certainly, like what we know already, it is not playing the same league as Varroa. And also your country is climatically advantaged. However, don't ignore it when it comes. So I think I would like to recommend to you guys, keep a balance view on this pest. Keep an eye on small hive beetle and get ready when it comes. Because if you ignore it and you don't adjust your management, small hive beetle can be nasty and cause quite a few problems. Good. All right. So going back, how did I get to know small hive beetle? Like when I was a PhD student in 1997, I did part of my PhD in Africa. I went out to the bees early in the morning, 4:30, because otherwise you're sweating to death in your bee suit in Africa. And I went to the hive, and it was a strange smell. A strange kind of sourish smell, and something was not okay. So a bit of smoke, I opened the hive, and there were thousands of maggots, and there were no bees left. And I was shocked. I've never seen that before in Europe. That was for me like, wow, what's this? So I locked up the hive, I went up to the department, and I asked, Prof, what's wrong here? You know, these maggots killing my hives, what's going on? And he told me, Peter, relax, a small hive beetle. Make a new hive and forget about it. Okay, all right. I made a new hive, of course I did, because I wanted to finish my PhD at the time. But I also said, that is really fascinating. So I tried to start to understand what these strange beetles are. And next slide, please. In 1997, there were 5 papers published in total on small hive beetle. So even though my English was very poor back then, and I had to use not an online tool, but I had to use an old dictionary, old school, it took me quite some time, but I was able to read the manuscripts in a couple of weeks, the entire word literature on small hive beetle. That was because in Africa, it's not an issue. 2 years later, now 1 year later, it was hitting the US quite hard, with tens of thousands of colonies being killed in Florida, and there was a significant increase over the years. And now when you check out now Google Scholar, there are over 3,000 papers dealing with small hive beetle. So there is a massive increase in our knowledge and in the research efforts on this pest. Next slide, please. So to understand small hive beetle, it's quite important to have a look at the small hive beetle world tour. Here on the map, on the global map, you see reported introductions and the geographical range of Tina tomida. In dark red, you see the native range in sub-Saharan Africa, including Madagascar. And in light red, you see areas on the planet where small hive beetle is really well established. I would like to draw your attention first to the United States in 1996. A beekeeper went to a colleague in US showing a beetle roaming in his hives. And the colleague said, oh, very interesting. He took the beetle and put it in his cupboard and forgot about it because he was convinced it is a native beetle and not an issue. 2 years later, again, about 30,000 colonies were killed by small hive beetle in Florida, and people were panicking and had another careful look. And they said, oops, that's Tina tomida. That's actually a species not native to the United States. All right. And then the story began. Since then, you know, small hive beetle made it into many, many areas. And in Australia and in the United States, it has really well-established populations and can cause drastic impact in areas where the climate is favoring the pest. There is an ongoing invasion front from North America into South America. And totally independent of that, there was another introduction to Brazil in 2015. In 2 cases here, that's Portugal 2004 and Egypt 2000, small hive beetle was introduced, but did not manage to establish. And in Portugal, we know for sure, that was because there were the right sanitation measures taken. So a good lesson also for you guys. When you have it and it's in an initial stage, don't give up and try to kill small hive beetle before it's spreading in your country. Next, please. There's more damage to the western honeybees, Apis mellifera, in invasive ranges. Small hive beetle can be an issue in Africa. It's not harmless. In fact, one of my PhD students is from Kenya, and about 1/3 of the beekeepers in Kenya also report issues with it. The point is, however, that in the novel ranges, the impact can be much more severe. Next, please. A personal worry of myself and other colleagues is what is going to happen when small hive beetle, is spreading in Asia, where many more species of honeybee genus are native. And there's one report that eastern honeybees, Apis cerana, seem to be more susceptible to Aetina tumida compared to western honeybees. So I don't hope, I don't hope that this is causing issues, because several of the species, Apis koshevnikovi, Nigrocincta, some of the species are probably in need for conservation anyhow. And I don't hope that small hive beetle may be another problem for those wild honeybees of Asia. Next, please. The point is, when a small hive beetle is spreading, it is important to understand how the beetle can spread between countries. And as most invasive species, small hive beetle shows a so-called jump dispersal. So from one, often the endemic range, to novel ranges, but also between novel ranges, invasive species make jumps from one country to another. And once they are in a novel area, there's a dispersal within this area. So we try to understand where the beetles are from, because that is quite an important information we should get. But what people have done quite a few times is to look at genetics, and genetics data is suggesting that small hive beetle has independent introductions from Africa. Here in red are the genetic lines from Africa to the United States, but also from Africa into Australia, and then also into subsequently into Hawaii. Good. So correlations is not necessarily causation, even though genetics are also genetic tools are valid arguments. For example, if you're having a law case and several, so genetics are quite important. But it would be good if we could link that with something else. And indeed, we were able to do so, because the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, is collecting lots and lots of trade data, including beeswax trade data. And when we exclude the cases for which no FAO data were available, and the one here, for example, number 5 here in Europe, you see in Portugal, we know for sure it was import of queen cages, so we could exclude safely other ways. But in this case, there's a very strong correlation between the FAO wax trade data and genetics. Here in several cases, you can see from the United States, there were export of wax into Brazil, into Korea, into Canada, to many other places. And also, interesting enough, there was export from wax from South Africa to Australia, and here from Kenya and Tanzania into Italy. So this is very, very likely a causation. Next, please. So we have very good evidence that the combination of genetics and FAO data strongly suggests that this is a key for international jumps. So please be aware when you import wax. I kindly suggest do not import wax from Africa, full stop. This is a major concern for the global spread of small hive beetle. Next, please. Good, but it's not solely wax spread. What else comes into play? And if we look what the data we have, reports from all over the world, next, please. The picture is as follows. I told you already that was number 5 was crystal clear, because the small hive beetles were found into queen cages. So for me, it's actually hard to believe, all of us have most of us have put queens in cages. I did that many times. So you have to be really, really tired in not seeing small hive beetle in these cages. So, but anyhow, things can happen, and they inevitably will happen. And also package bees and entire colonies. So whenever you export or import bees, be aware that small hive beetle can be a blind passenger. And the chances of overseeing it is in function of the size. So in the package bees, again, you have to be kind of blind not to see them. But with a whole colony, the beetles like to hide in corners. It is extremely difficult to spot 1 or 2 beetles over there. So this is the second very important international pathway. Please, again, I can only recommend that to you guys. Do not import any bees from countries which have small hive beetle, because then the chances are very high that you get small hive beetle in New Zealand. Next, please. Yeah, so international trade with wax or bees governs global spread. I think that's pretty safe to say that. Next, please. Good. Another part is when the small hive beetle has reached a new area, how is it spreading within the novel introduction ranges? And here we got, I think, a good lesson from the United States of America, because here in 1996, that's on the map on the left side, you see North, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia being affected. And in 2000, within 2 years' time, many states close to the border to Canada, that's far north, were at definite signs, because the bee inspectors and beekeepers had to report the pest. So we have clear data that the beetle was there. However, all the states in between the original ones and the north did not, because small hive beetle can fly, but doesn't fly hundreds of miles. So that is, I think, very clear evidence that, next please, migratory beekeeping is an issue. We also have other cases. I just took United States as an example. We have similar evidence from Australia and other places. So if you're transporting hundreds of hives here, for example, in a truck, we used to do the trip here from Florida to California for almond pollination. When you do that, it is inevitable that you take small hive beetle as a passenger. So I was delighted that, for example, in Italy, where the southern part, we have now an established population also in Italy, that the people have banned migratory beekeeping from this area. And I think that's a reason, even though small hive beetle is now for almost 10 years in Italy, that they have not reached Milano or Rome in the north. So this is another thing I can highly recommend to you. If you have it in your country, stop migratory beekeeping from the areas having the beetles. Otherwise, quickly you have it across the whole country. Next, please. Yeah, migratory beekeeping is a major factor. I think there's no doubt. Next, please. All right, now the life cycle of Athena tumida in association with a social bee host here that it's supposed to be a wild honeybee colony. I hope you can see that it's meant to be a cavity in a tree. All right, when we're looking at the honeybee nest, you all know nests here. We have the honeycombs, you have the brood combs, we have the bees on it and the beetles. And when you're looking now here in the red circle in the middle, that's basically the life cycle in short. The adults are flyers. We now have evidence that they can fly for 12 kilometers within 2 days. So they are really capable flyers. So when they emerge from the soil, they can they find host nets, probably with cues, with olfactory cues of the smell, and they intrude strong and weak honeybee colonies with equal impunity. Lundin 1940, that is known forever. Once they're in a colony, the bees try to do a good job in keeping them out. They can put them in prison, they attack them, but the beetles make a turtle posture. So I've seen over all those years, I've only seen one case over several decades of work with small hive beetle where the bees managed to kill small hive beetle. It's extremely rare. These beetles are little tanks, and they are smart and quick, and they have a lot of behaviors. They also can drop from the comb. When the bees attack them, they just drop down, turn around, and walk away. So they are well adapted to live with the bees. Then also, like the bees are feeding the beetle, which I think is insane, yeah. Even though they recognize it as an enemy, they try to attack it. But the beetle is just hitting like a reflex with our own bodies. The beetles are using the antenna to drop in a specific rhythm on the mandibles, and then the bees are opening the mandibles and feed the beetles. When I first saw that was in 2001, I couldn't believe it. We made a videos and it does, wow, it's amazing. There's a whole range of other behaviors. I don't want to go into the big details, but when you're having the larvae feeding on whatever in the colony, Well, the eggs need 2 to 3 days to hatch, and then the larvae feed on whatever is in there. And when they have completed it, they reach a so-called one-ring stage, the post-feeding larvae. They leave the colony for pupation in the soil. Ideally, when the soil is good, they go within a couple of 1 or 2 feet. They go into the soil and go there. Sorry, if, however, the soil is not suitable, the beetle can crawl long distance. When working in Africa, we got into real trouble, our team, because we were rearing small beetle for experiments, and we were in the 2nd floor, and the secretary on the ground floor was complaining because the beetles were trying to pupate in her pot plants. So we got into trouble here, guys. So it was about 50 meters the beetle larvae were able to crawl within a few hours. So they can crawl long distance. And then they move in, they make the pupation. In the pupation in the soil, you can see here the temperature and humidity are quite important. If it shouldn't be too wet, it shouldn't be too dry, some reasonable moist soil and a reasonable good temperature, 25 degrees is almost perfect. The beetle will definitely make a quick pupation and the adults then fly away and cross the life cycle. So this is here again, just an overview on this issue. Next slide, please. All right, smaller beetles are omnivorous. They eat everything. We got into trouble. They even eat rotten schnitzel. So this is not smelling very nicely, as you can imagine, yeah? But the beetle don't care. If forced to, if there's no other food around, they also eat meat. It's not so surprising because some relatives of Etina tomida play an important role in forensic entomology. So they can be found on bodies. Anyway, and they can survive on whatever food. And so they steal the food from the bees. They eat live, they crawl on the backs of live bees and kill them while they're still alive. I've seen that with freshly emerged bees, have a soft cuticle. The beetles realize this is a vulnerable bee, they jump on it and they just eat it alive. Yeah. And they can also eat flowers, honey, pollen, something. In Africa, the people in the supermarket were looking at me strangely because I was always getting these almost rotten bananas. And the people, this white man is crazy, he's only taking the wrong banana. But the beetle love banana. All these gone bananas say it's much better because you don't have to sacrifice brood or pollen frames or more colonies. So it's just, the beetle is quite flexible. Next, please. Yeah, then the damage to colonies, again here, is more common in the invasive ranges. So honeybees of in Europe or of European origin are more susceptible to infestations, and there's just more reports of problems. And here I'm a bit more careful in my wording. This distinct impact of small beetle is probably due to quantitative differences in infestation levels. That's fairly simple. Many beetles, many problems. So, for example, in Australia, I found colonies where the entire bottom board was black. We counted over 1,000 smaller beetles in a single hive. If the infestation levels are so high, it is obvious that there are problems. Then also quantitative difference in host behaviors. What does that mean? Whatever we looked at so far, like stinging or propolis and so on, prisons, all these behaviors are present in both African subspecies or populations of honeybees as well as in European ones. But African bees or Africanized bees in South America are superior. They do it more efficient or they do it more often. Climate plays a role. Sorry, they also published a paper on this. Again, temperature should be high and the soil should be reasonably moist. So I assume that, again, based on your climate, you guys are probably in New Zealand not as much in trouble as, for example, people in Florida. And animal release can play a role. So animal release means, when an invasive species is going from one area to a novel area, that the pests and pathogens of this or parasites of this particular species are left behind. That is a common thing in invasive species and there's good evidence for a number of invasions. Smaller beetle we know very little, but it could nicely explain, for example, why in Mexico colonies of Africanized honeybees can be high infestation levels, even though Africanized honeybees are supposed to be more resilient to infections. Sorry, next please. All right, I talked a bit about the alternative host and food sources, and I want to just give you a few examples what we know. Next, please. This is a colony of Tetragonula carbonaria. It's time when I worked there, it was Trigona. And that is in Sydney. That is a hive we used to work with. It's not in Sydney, it's in Richmond, but it's also in New South Wales, close to Richmond. And there you see on the left side, next to this stingless beehive, you see smaller beetle larvae damaging a colony. So these colonies can also be in trouble, especially if you work with them, then the colonies seem to be more vulnerable, compared to colonies not disturbed. Next, please. Yeah, that is here in Brazil. There's also in the paper published here last year, 2 years ago, that, stingless bee colonies in Brazil are also infected. Next, please. And also bees of solitary bees making their nest. You can see, Megaschiel rotundata in the United States. And, you can see smaller beetles going into these nests, laying egg and reproducing. Next, please. There's a smaller beetle. It's a beautiful picture, actually. You can see the beetle on a flower. And that is one of my students told me, Peter, come over. Here's a smaller beetle on a flower, and I've never seen that before. That was crazy. I worked with smaller beetles for so many years, and I haven't seen it. And there were beetles visiting regularly a number of flowers when we worked in Auburn. So that is, again, putting a lot of difficulties, because when we try to control this pest, when the beetle can take a snack on a flower, it is impossible to grab them all, because even if we kill them in a colony, some beetles may fly away. They fly quicker than you want sometimes, and they can just go to a flower, to a solitary bee nest, or to whatever. You don't have, you'll see that also like in bumblebees, for example. It's always, if you're doing pest control, it is very difficult if you have reservoirs. Holds true for a number of diseases of humans. We know a couple of reservoir hosts, for example, influenzas and pigs and things like that. So this is a very similar story. The more species are involved, the more difficult it is to get a proper grip on a pest. Next, please. Yeah, I believe it's an urgent need to better understand the role of these alternative hosts and food sources to have a better grip on smaller beetle. Next, please. All right, something about some facts here from basic biology. Next, please. I already told you, that smaller beetle is being fed by the bees, and we have now pretty good evidence that, the bees feeding smaller beetle also give the protein-rich, from a hypopharyngeal glands, these protein-rich secretions. What we don't know, however, is whether those secretions are sufficient that the smaller beetle can activate ovaries. Because when the females emerge from the soil, the smaller beetle females, they go into a colony, we know their ovaries are not developed, so they need proteins. What we don't know right now is whether the food, the protein food given from the workers is sufficient to do so. That we should actually investigate soon. Next, please. Then, what we also look at, what's the cuticular hydrocarbons. These are chemicals on the surface of an insect. Bees use the hydrocarbons to detect whether it's a nestmate or not nestmate. And the hydrocarbon profile of the smaller beetle is very low, and it's not specific to the colony. So in sharp contrast to many other species associated with social insects, they do not mimic the smell of their host. And so they have to rely on the right. You see the famous turtle defense posture. So even though the beetle is has their head and the antenna out, when it's doing it, it's retracting everything. So it's, for the bees, again, almost impossible to kill it. Yeah. So this hard exoskeleton and the defense behaviors together is pretty good defense for smaller beetle, like for many other beetles as well. Next, please. That we also know by now is that we have here a promiscuous mating system, meaning that both the males and the female smaller beetle commonly mate multiple times. So the males can successfully inseminate at least 8 females, and also the females mate many times. So this is, when we know this, that is possibly one of the reasons why they are so successful invasive species. And I just can give an example. For example, guppies. Guppies are fish, and these fish, they can become a real pest. And a single guppy female is able to establish a successful population elsewhere, because also guppy females are multiple mated. So there's probably something behind. If we better understand, we should look at the mating system in a bit more detail. And also some control issues will not work. For example, the sterile male technique, where you castrate males basically, cannot work when females melt with multiple males. It's doomed to fail. Next, please. Yeah, so we know very, very little about smaller beetle basic biology. And I really try to promote research. Of course, it's good to develop traps and whatever, but at the end of the day, you have to understand your enemy to beat it properly. So we need to better understand smaller beetle to see where are the weaknesses of this particular species, that we're not running into the same trouble as we have a varroa. So chemical control is, I think it's a dead-end street. Certainly not a sustainable solution, I believe. Next, please. Yeah, prevention. Here you see a picture from the United States you don't want to see. The left picture is from a honey harvesting room, and the right is an apiary where the beekeeper put concrete on the floor to prevent that smaller beetle larvae can pupate in the soil. In principle, again, that's not very smart because the smaller beetle larvae can crawl long distance. But what was even less smart is when you look underneath the hives, and you don't believe it, there were tens of thousands of smaller beetle larvae underneath the hives. So if your apiary and your honey room look like this, your colonies die. End of story. So that was no surprise. So prevention is, can be quite important. Next, please. So, next, please. Yeah, sorry. Prevention is key. Next, please. Yeah, best prevention is good beekeeping practice. And I believe an integral part of good beekeeping practice is to keep your honey house and your apiary tidy. If there's a lot of dirt laying around, the beetle larvae love dead bees or whatever debris, they go for it. Or here in the honey house, there's so much honey leaking out of whatever storage, then the beetle just eat that. Next, please. First line of defense, especially that's important for you guys, border control. Again, please do not import beeswax from areas where small live beetle has been reported. You get into trouble. Second, please do not import bee queens, packaged bees, or any colonies from other countries. This is the second most successful way. Border control, quite important. Don't do it. Please, my recommendation. Next, please. Yeah, then, if your protection and surveillance zones that, we have some experience now from number of cases that, harbors are the places where small live beetle appears, which makes perfect sense because wax is normally transported on ships and not on airplanes. So that is, check out the areas around harbors. If you're really concerned, do that. In Switzerland, we do it. We have, our border to the south, to Italy. We have sentinel. We have quite a few sentinel apiaries, and we check that very carefully because we do not want small live beetle in Switzerland. Next, please. Yeah, so these colonies are basically, we put colonies out there to attract these flea-flying beetles. And, whatever it is, they may have escaped things. So it is always good to put sentinel colonies out there. This is the best trap we have, small live beetle, is a colony of bees. Next, please. Yeah, in free areas, what you could think about, check out where they have them or where you get them. And we're currently developing new diagnostic tools, molecular tools, that we are able to detect a single beetle in a colony of 10,000 bees. If you're interested, I would be very happy to talk to you about this and give recommendations. Molecular tools is the way to do here, because the single beetle, even if you very carefully screen a colony, you will miss it. I promise you. The beetles are very quick and they run away from light, hide in corners, and when just before you see it, it's just flying away into the sun and you can't see it anymore. Next, please. Yeah, containment in infested areas. I gave you an example of Italy briefly already early on. The Italians are doing a great job. I admire their efforts, and they keep small live beetle in a tiny region all right. Okay, thanks a lot. I talked too much. All right, next, please. All right, prevention, keep strong, queen and healthy colonies. That's important in any case. Next, please. Yeah, keep everything tidy. Important is no storage of old combs, is that possible, or store them in cool rooms, open places where, where the beetles cannot access. Next, please. Yeah. Honey harvesting, get the honey out immediately. If you leave honeycombs alone for a long time, the beetle will ruin and you can't use it anymore. Next, please. Yeah, don't give the bees too much space and always enable access to bees to all parts of the hive. If you work through a colony and you leave one frame too close to a hive wall, I promise you, this colony is likely to collapse because the beetle larvae can go where the bees have no access, the larvae will come. Next, please. Yeah, this is a sand option. When the beetles have good sand, it's more of an issue. If you can't do that, try to move your bees if possible. Next, please. Yeah, control, chemical control, as I already said, about Varroa is the same story. You can use it in the hive to kill it in the soil, but this is no sustainable solution because the beetles will become resistant, and we know for sure that, for example, queen bees are suffering if you treat a colony with chemicals. Next, please. Yeah, alternative control, where there's quite a few things out there, and I'm quite honest with you guys. I would use my traps myself if a smaller beetle in my area, but it's moderate efficient. There is a lot of effort. We need to improve our efforts here. Next, please. I would like to summarize my presentation briefly here. Smaller beetle is a widespread invasive species, and global bee and wax trades are key for jumps. Again, for the third time, please do not import beeswax and bees from areas with a beetle. I can only repeat myself again. Migratory beekeeping fosters spread in new ranges. If you have smaller beetle, just ban migratory beekeeping. That's the way to keep it. Learning from Italy. Then there's an exceptional degree of parasite opportunism. This beetle is just insane. It's doing crazy things, and well, I love it. It's just fascinating. The basic biology is still far too poorly understood. We do not know at the moment the weaknesses to have a good grip on this pest. There's urgent need to understand more. Damage to colonies is more common in the invasive ranges. I believe it probably be moderately damaging New Zealand, not a drama, but again, don't ignore it. And prevention and control of it must be enhanced. Take it serious in New Zealand and keep honey houses tidy and things like that. Yeah, generally, we need to enhance our knowledge about this pest. Next slide, please. Yeah, here's a smaller beetle in a colony of bumblebees, bumblefish, and patients in North America. Many thanks for your kind attention. I'm open for any questions.